Hi everyone, this is Carter from Unsafe Space. What you are about to watch is a censored version of our latest episode of The Great Reset, which, as you probably know, is a regular series on Unsafe Space hosted by Ian K. When we uploaded this episode, the YouTube censors immediately removed it for violating their medical misinformation policy. In other words, Dr. Rectenwald and Ian dared to express skepticism about the official WHO narrative. They also suspended the Unsafe Space account for a week, which is why you are seeing this here. To watch the full uncensored version, please visit unsafespace.com/EP0542. That's lowercase e, lowercase p, 0542. That stands for episode 542. The best way to find Unsafe Space content, including the Great Reset series, is always by visiting unsafespace.com. They have no control over what we post there. So here's the censored version of Ian's interview with Dr. Michael Rectenwald.
Your social credit score will start off as a medical score or a medical passport, and then it could easily slide into a social justice credit scoring system.
Well, hello, everyone. I am Ian K., and joining me is Dr. Michael Rectenwald. God, I hope I didn't butcher that.
No, that's good. Rectenwald.
So you have been talking about the Great Reset. You've written several articles, which I have read all of them. And I've been doing content for Unsafe Space talking about the Great Reset. And so here we are.
Great.
So tell the audience about yourself.
Well, yeah, I'm a former NYU professor. I was a professor for 11 years there and 14 years elsewhere at Duke and Carnegie Mellon, Case Western, etc. I've written a lot of books, I guess, 4 in the last 2 years, and the most recent is Thought Criminal, which is a novel, and before that, Beyond Woke on Google Archipelago and Springtime for Snowflakes. That's what I've written since my academic career, since it ended in January 2019. And I've been writing for the Mises Institute and doing a lot of public speaking. And I pretty prolific in terms of articles. I'm putting out articles pretty often. Everything can be found on my website at michaelrectenwald.com.
So how did you find out about the Great Reset?
Well, I think actually, strangely enough and embarrassingly, I guess, through InfoWars, I think was the first place I saw any mention of it. And I thought, well, let's put this on the back burner and see if there's anything to it later. And then I saw several other articles, and then, of course, when Klaus Schwab wrote COVID-19, The Great Reset, that got my attention, and I read that, and then the Fourth Industrial Revolution, which came out earlier, but I read it later. And then, of course, paying attention to the World Economic Forum's website and their meeting last year, which was called the Great Reset, and basically just got very concerned. And then I saw the connections between the Great Reset and some of my own theories about what's afoot politically and economically. And then I decided to jump in on it because it seemed to me to be right in the wheelhouse of what I was writing about in terms of the establishment of this kind of neo-feudalism that I see afoot.
Yeah, I find this whole thing to be very interesting. I discovered it last year from a YouTuber named Dave Cullen, who covered a Hill article, which I ended up covering on my channel back in July. Mm-hmm. And it just it's kind of frightening, right? I mean, growing up, being in my 20s in the 90s, I'd hear people like Tex Mars talking about the, New World Order and all this stuff. And it just kind of made fun of all this stuff that seemed like nonsense, right? I mean, the internet wasn't widely used at the time, but there's all these books on it. They talked about, obviously the UN, the Trilateral Commission, all these other kind of like globalist organizations. And it all seemed like a bunch of nonsense, but it's different when you actually see something like the World Economic Forum actually telling you what they're going to do. And then you're like, maybe they were on something.
Yeah, definitely. And certainly when you consider all the corporate partners they have enlisted, which is like every major corporation in the world, basically, they're all on board. So you start to pay attention. And then when you hear people in their campaign speeches and their slogans and so forth using the same language, you have to take note.
Yeah, you do. And it's funny because I know that you've mentioned the New York Times article where they kind of, saying, this is just nothing more than a right-wing conspiracy, even though they're laying it right out there, right on the World Economic Forum's website. You can go and read about the Great Reset right there.
Exactly. And then Time Magazine ran a whole issue devoted to it soon after the New York Times piece appeared, and basically in praise of the whole project. So yeah, this is not a conspiracy at all. It's conspiracy by definition. A conspiracy would be clandestine. This is wide open, wide open plan. And I think the reason the New York Times tries to disavow it is because they think that the agenda is actually great. It's a wonderful thing. So it's a conspiracy to think that it's nefarious, I think, is really what it comes down to.
Mm-hmm. So what is the goal? What's the end game of the Great Reset?
Well, I think it is this neo-feudalistic order that is a kind of two-tiered system with corporate oligarchs on top, with a very limited palette of corporations permitted to produce and distribute goods, and with a kind of actually existing socialism on the bottom, with a population that's effectively beholden to these corporate players, and then basically having their consumption limited by virtue of the direction of production to these particular approved corporate players. And so I think that it represents the kind of what I've called corporate socialism, and I distinguish that from the sort of the use by democratic socialists or left, who basically refer to that as kind of corporate bailouts. I'm talking about monopolies or near monopolies running the economy and effectively instituting a kind of a new state, which is takes a lot of power and self-determination away from the masses and places it into what I'll call the elite, because they're the ones who are allowed to produce, that are allowed to have that are controlling opinion, that are distributing almost all the goods, and so I call them elite because they are accepted players and they're all billionaire. They're in the billionaire class for the most part. So if that isn't elite, I don't know what is.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that I thought was really funny is that when the World Economic Forum had their meeting in Davos back in January, they released this video where they kind of lay out all these talking points. And one of them was the idea of the, world's largest transfer wealth to these big companies, but yet they're in bed with these companies. And this is a issue that, for the most part, governments have invented through these lockdowns. We wouldn't need all these stimulus checks right now if they just kept the economy going, and we'd be fine.
Exactly. The lockdowns have contributed to this, and Schwab even has noted in the COVID-19, the Great Reset, he said it was an opportunity to be seized upon in order to bring the reset about. That tells me that what's happened during the lockdowns is in line with the Great Reset. If the COVID crisis is helping bring about the reset, then what's happened in the lockdowns must be part quite in line with, or if not part and parcel of the reset itself, which is the destruction of small businesses. Some 50% or more of American small businesses wiped out. This massive transfer of wealth, according to what I've read, 20%, the corporate oligarchs, Amazon, Walmart, etc., Apple, have seen a 20% rise in their net worth, and this is the oligarchs that control them, like Bezos and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
They've gotten a 20% hike in their net worth over the last year. And starting from billions to begin with, we're talking about multiple billions of dollars that would have gone to other places, that would have gone to other businesses, transferred to Amazon, etc. So this is an enormous wealth shift. And of course, it also involves an enormous abrogation of rights. Not only have we been locked down, we have been we've lost our freedom of motion and movement and association and religion and speech vis-a-vis the big tech and oligarchs controlling our expression. So, this is quite a shift in power from the majority to this small minority of producers and controllers of the economy and the political sphere. It's pretty enormous.
How long do you think this has been going on? Because it seems like, to me, they tried to use the swine flu, I want to say pandemic that happened. I want to say it was in 2008, 2009, right around there, but it never really kind of panned out. And it seems like this has been in play for quite some time, and we're really seeing it gain traction more recently.
Yeah, I think Schwab has been trying to get this reset going for decades. And climate change, of course, is the main pretext. So they've been using climate change as the pretext for this. So it's been a propaganda campaign for decades, and I'd say that it's now been put into effect. It's starting to be put into effect in the last couple of years, probably the last year for the most part, more intensely. So it's been going on for a while in terms of a propaganda and PR campaign, but it's really accelerated as of late. So we're looking at a real acceleration in terms of the precepts of the reset being instituted.
Yeah. And it seems like the whole thing with the lockdowns, they were not meant to end. Of course, they're using COVID as the reasoning. But now with the success of these lockdowns, it seems like they can be using them for the environment. I mean, oh, look at this. The Earth is healing itself because of these lockdowns. Therefore, we should continue to do them. That way we can get rid of, global warming or whatnot.
Yeah, Schwab's even said that. Look at how much better the environment is since the lockdowns have been instituted. He's tweeted about it. He said it verbally elsewhere. He's basically saying that, the lockdowns have done a great deal of good for the environment, and they are doing the work that the resetters want done.
That's absolutely insane. I mean, with how do they expect all this to work? I know you talked about it. I've seen a lot of their videos. I read the blog post about what the cities could look like in 2030, and you own nothing, not even your own clothing, and that just seems like a recipe for disaster. I'm here in Texas, and we got hit by that winter storm, and it just seems like something like that, if you're not prepared, would largely disrupt the system of automation. And a lot of people could lose their lives. We already saw people lose their lives out of desperation here in Texas because people were trying to stay warm, and they, died of carbon monoxide poisoning or accidentally lit their house on fire because they brought their grill inside.
Wow. Yeah. The problem is going to be whether vaccine or medical passports become required to basically engage in any kind of normal living. So even going to a grocery store might be impossible unless you can prove you either have taken the vaccine or you don't have COVID. At some point, it may be that you have to take the vaccine regardless of whether you've had COVID or not.
This sounds completely insane. And how can they get away with implementing this stuff in America?
Well, they've been doing it one step at a time. I guess the frog is boiling at 1 degree at a time.
Mm-hmm.
So they have, I think that the lockdowns were a good start for this because we've seen our rights abrogated one step at a time, and so it's like once you start losing rights, and it becomes acceptable to some people, at least it seems to me to be a majority that accept it, then it's normalized, and then this normalization is then increased.
Mm-hmm.
And so they keep increasing this idea of that you really don't have rights and that you really should forgo them, and that you're selfish or you're some sort of antisocial person if you don't forgo your rights, and that rights are not important. What matters is the collective good. And Schwab, if you've read or listened, I'm sure, and I know you have, he uses the words collective, collaborative,
mm-hmm.
endlessly. Everything is about the collective. So anytime people are starting to talk about the collective good, this is a sure sign of totalitarianism. This is exactly the kind of language which was used in the Soviet Union and China, and has been used by any leftist totalitarians in history every time. Collective good that phrase should alarm you to no end.
Yeah, absolutely. And it doesn't seem like it's a very large step from going from wearing masks to having some sort of digital passport in order to go and go to your grocery store. Because here in Texas, I know that we've basically rescinded our mask order, but in the city I live in, they can't fine you for not wearing a mask, but they can fine the business if they don't require you to wear a mask. So I see a lot of this enforcement being done by actual businesses rather than through governments because of the pressure that these governments can put on businesses.
Yes, I've been saying this for some time, that what they're doing is deputizing corporations and businesses to act as appendages of the state. I call this governmentalities. This is a term that I adopted and adapted from Michel Foucault, who talked about this term governmentalities. He actually coined the term to refer to the way people adopt the governmental decrees and effectively govern themselves. Well, I think it's also, it can be applied to the way corporate players are being deputized to be agents of the state. And in effect, so are individuals being deputized to be agents of the state. First of all, they're enacting these precepts against themselves or on themselves, and they're also helping to enforce state desiderata by enforcing it on others. The basic idea here is all the Karens running around screaming at you if you don't have a mask on, and so on and so forth. So these are like deputized state agents. So the state is I have a little difference here with strict libertarian thought. I think the state is much bigger than the government. I think the state extends well into the corporate world and into the private realm as well, into the individual citizen, into the individual subject. They become state apparatuses.
I completely agree with you. I think one of the greatest weaknesses of libertarianism as a libertarian is libertarianism. The argument of it's a private company doing these things, they should be allowed to do it, is not a good defense. I think it's a terrible idea. The fact that these companies like Twitter, Facebook, and even YouTube are banning people because they don't like what they're saying. That's so dangerous. But the defense is, it's a private company. They can do what they want.
Yeah. Meanwhile, they've gotten tremendous advantages from the state they have been, given the regulations that they need to do this. They have been given the leeway. Also, they got startup money from the federal government. In the case of Google and Facebook, both of these major corporations, they got startup funding from the intelligence community.
Yeah.
Either directly or indirectly. So they are state apparatuses, in my opinion, all of them. And so you're dealing with the state, and they have the alibi that they're private corporations at the same time, so they get away with restricting speech. They don't have to accord you First Amendment rights, and this is very tricky. The libertarians have fallen for it and said, well, they're private companies that, I don't have to let you into my house and you can say whatever you want. Just it's the same principle, except that they are the house.
Yeah.
There's no other house. And so basically they have circumscribed the public square and made it basically irrelevant to speak anywhere else. You look like a lunatic if you're standing out on a soapbox in the park. So these kinds of speech are meaningless, and you don't reach anyone that way. The digital sphere is the only place that's meaningful, where speech can be effective, efficacious. So, yeah, they've managed to privatize their spaces while being deputized as state agents to enforce these draconian rules of language and opinion and so on and so forth. So, yeah, it's a very pernicious development.
One of the things I've been talking about, not as much as I probably should, but I did a couple of years ago, was about the social credit system that is being implemented in China. Right. And obviously, we allegedly have free speech here in the United States, but it seems like the easiest way to implement a social credit system here in the States would be through companies and not through the government. Based off of what you said, I think that's very viable.
Well, first of all, they're doing it. Companies themselves are now being subjected to a social credit score system, and that is through the environmental, social, and governance scores. There's an environmental, social, and governance index that companies are being subjected to, so that if they're not environmentally, socially, and that means social justice, socially and governance-wise, if they're not acceptable, then investments are being directed away from them. So they're squeezing out dollars from investments from those corporations that don't abide by this ESG scoring index. And this is being done through major asset managers like BlackRock Inc., which is the largest asset manager in the world. And Larry Fink, appropriately named, is sent a letter in 2021 letter to CEOs admonishing them and strongly encouraging, if not threatening them, by virtue of suggesting that if their ESG scores are not high, then they won't be seeing any investments from his firm. And this is the largest investment firm in the world. So that's already corporations have social credit scores.
That is insane.
And then now individuals could get, the social credit scoring is likely going to come vis-a-vis the virus mandates, so that your social credit score will start off as a medical score or a medical passport, and then it could easily slide into a social justice credit scoring system, so that you'll have a score that indicates just how woke you are, in effect.
This sounds very Black Mirror.
Yeah, it's very Black Mirror. So if you're deemed antisocial on the COVID crisis index, this could slide over into other things. In fact, I think the Branch Covidians is what I call the COVID cultists, and the Woketopians are the same people. And this is part and parcel of the same totalitarianism, to adopt wokeness and to adopt the COVID crisis, proper COVID crisis mentality. These are two things that are effectively, intricately, and inextricably wed, in my opinion.
How do we push back against that? I mean, it seems like, and I'll circle back towards the end about this as well. But how do we push back against social credit systems like this? I mean, when it's I've seen a lot of this wokeness infesting, obviously, the government. It's making its way into HR departments. I see it at the company I work for, and with basically short of saying "screw you guys, I'm out of here." How do we push back against the stuff making its way into companies and whatnot?
Yeah, the social credit scores. I think we have to fight it legally and rhetorically. Legally, we have to use the Constitution, or what's left of it, to show how these scores would be an infringement of our constitutional rights, and then we have to flout the demands as much as possible. I saw a hopeful sign of that today. St. Patrick's Day celebrations are going on right around where I live here. I live in a kind of college hub, and the students are out in mass without masks on.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah, it's a great sign. It was very refreshing to see masses of students, congregating in house parties and elsewhere in the streets without masks, and they're completely But whereas when I see them around the university itself, they're masked up to the T, because the opprobrium that attaches to being mask free is so intense that it takes quite a rugged individual to flout it. So I think, but we do have to. We're going to need to start thinking about civil disobedience in this country and what it means, and how to enact it. We're going to have to start to find ways to exert and to be civilly disobedient. Of course, I'm invoking Thoreau here, but civil disobedience is going to be a major aspect of how we fight back against this.
I agree. The issue I think that we're going to face with that is, when things are done for social justice causes or causes on the left, like we saw last year with the Floyd riots, it's going to be mostly peaceful protests. And when we see things that happen like on January 6th, it's going to be dubbed an insurrection and white supremacy.
Right.
And we have the media machine basically spinning what is good and what is bad at this point.
Yeah, they're total propagandists, and they're vilifying anything that is resistant to woketopia and COVIDian precepts. So that is something that we're going to have to fight. We're going to have to fight it in the public square as much as possible by just reasserting our value and values, and basically, we're going to have it out with people not physically, hopefully. We're going to have it out with people. We're going to have to assert our rights and not allow them to vilify us, or if they do vilify us, not allow it to mean anything to us. And part of that is going to involve becoming uncancelable. Now, I say that becoming uncancelable is only possible through individual economic autonomy, which is very hard to achieve under the circumstances we're under.
Yes.
The more you can make your economic base autonomous and independent from these major institutions, that's corporations, of course, academia, the state, effectively all of those places which are completely woked, and from which you're utterly cancelable at any time, no matter what, even what you do during off hours and on certainly what you do on social media is scrutinized to the nth degree. And so we're going to have to create autonomous islands of individuals and networks who are able to both trade with each other and express themselves with each other. There are some movements afoot to do this. I'm not sure how much currency or how much efficacy they have at this point, but they are at least underway in formation. I think that we need to have networks of what I call thought deviationists, which is drawn out of my novel Thought Criminal, where there's a network of thought deviationists who are attempting to remain independent and disconnected from collective mind, which is the overarching processing and database system that's controlling the thoughts of the vast majority. So we need to have networks. We must network together and create networks of deviationism that allows us to maintain our autonomy and fight against the incursions of this overarching and totally penetrating system.
Yeah. So I work in tech, and something I identified very early on as being potentially very dangerous is big data.
Yeah.
The idea that, well, in the early days of the internet, data used to be ephemeral. Nobody hung on to it. But now all this stuff is being collected, collated, and analyzed by AI algorithms to be able to predict people's patterns and behaviors.
Right. Predictive algorithms are definitely, they're out there already. I mean, there's no question about it. And when 5G is instituted and basically smart cities are effectively erected in most cities, which I think is a foregone conclusion, then the data collection will be ubiquitous. So we'll be inside the internet in effect. There will be no outside of the internet. You will not be going on the internet. You'll be in the internet.
That's so frightening.
And we're close to that anyway, right? When every move is tracked and traced and collected and collated, and then your behavior is predicted by algorithms, and cyberspace is ubiquitous and all encompassing, it'll be very difficult to do anything that won't be known.
Yeah, that is incredibly dangerous. I remember when Snowden broke the news on Prism, and we had the president saying, "Oh, it's just metadata. We're not listening to your calls." A lot of people don't understand that metadata defines them as a person. They're able to go and predict their behaviors because, oh, you get up at this time. You stop for coffee before heading on to work. They know when you leave because you call your spouse.
Right.
All these things. I mean, as much as I love my smartphone, I know it's nothing more than a spying device that tracks my habits and trends.
Right. I mean, everyone would say with reference to the NSA and Snowden and all that, oh, well, if you're not doing anything wrong, what are you worried about?
Exactly.
The question is, the question is the ever-shifting definition of what's wrong. And this could take in social credit scores, social justice credit scores, really, when it comes down to it. I've been saying this for 2 years, that social justice credit scores are a heartbeat away. And this means that every utterance will be scored, will be part of your score. If you say something under your breath, likely it'll be picked up by some smart assistant or other. And this will be known. And these things, I know it sounds really far-fetched in this juncture, but
I don't think it's that far-fetched. I really don't.
Yeah, I think it's pretty close. And I've had Siri actually talk back to me after I've sworn or said something and basically told me to watch my mouth. And
Really?
People say that didn't happen. Yes, it did. I have a witness that Siri talked through my car speakers, admonishing me to watch my language.
Wow. That's one thing I have turned off is the voice detection for Siri on my phone, because I do have an iPhone. But that's for exactly that reason. I don't like the idea that there's a device that's listening to me. Even with the Amazon Echo, which I am very much against not having, despite having one because my wife purchased it. I don't like being around it. I don't want that thing recording what I say or what I talk about.
Christmas and I didn't turn it on. It's just sitting here. I thought about smashing it just in case it's actually passively listening somehow, even though it's not charged. But even all these things are tracking and tracing us to the nth degree. And the question is, what use will be made of this data? And what will be deemed an infraction somehow? it looks somewhat hopeful now that some of the states are starting to lift their COVID restrictions, Mississippi, Texas, and elsewhere. I think that's a good sign. If we could have a critical mass of states defying, or the Biden emergency situation that he wants to keep us in. I mean, they want to keep COVID an emergency for an indefinite period of time, I think.
I think you're right.
And I don't think certainly we've been told there will be no return to normal. It's back to normal. We're never going back, according to them. So this means these kind of restrictions forever. And it's very typical that the state doesn't revoke its powers once they gain it.
So there was an email. I'm not sure if you saw it. It allegedly came out of someone who worked in the Canadian Parliament, basically laying out what they're planning on doing with these COVID camps. And we're seeing this currently in Canada, where they have these hotels that they're calling COVID camps, where people coming in are being detained. And it's the idea that if they deem that you are dangerous because of COVID, either because you come into contact or you have it, you can be put into these camps. And I guess the idea is to have people detained indefinitely if they have, wrongthink, ultimately. And this was laid out in an email, and it was even discussed in their parliament. And this is before all this stuff started happening. And it seems like, this email is definitely becoming a reality.
Oh, yeah. I mean, the UK is totally down on this entirely. I mean, what's happening there is beyond frightening. I can't believe that the citizens there are succumbing to this. I mean, it's just a draconian lockdowns, and their freedoms are completely gone. I mean, I think in April they'll be allowed to sit on a park bench with another human being. At this point, they're
ridiculous.
Not. This is unbelievable. So I do have to say that we do have in the United States a more independent streak and a strain of independence that is helping us to some extent. So I don't want to paint this as totally hopeless. I think that we do have a tradition and a heritage of, shall we say, independence and belief in liberty, which I think has to be invoked and stirred up and reignited, so that we can push back against these very draconian possibilities, like we see in the UK and elsewhere. And now in Israel, they're already instituting the vaccine passport.
Really?
Yeah, Israel is the most. It seems to me to be the test case state entirely for what you can see what a population will succumb to.
I'm actually very surprised that Israel would go for that.
Yeah, I am too. I'm I'm not an anti-Israeli type person. Like, I'm not. That's the typical leftist position that Israel's evil and all this. I think Israel has a perfect right to exist. But interestingly enough, I think because of the way they have been besieged by their neighbors, that they have been kind of habituated there to a kind of a draconian state that is on the lookout and guard at all times, and is subjecting their own population now to the kind of surveillance and so forth that they have enacted on their neighbors out of self-defense. Rightly so, I think they've had to. But I think that it's really a test case for where the states could go.
That is frightening. And I know that at least here in the United States, we have two amendments I think are very important to pushing back to this and maintaining our rights, which is the First and Second Amendment. And as we know, those two amendments have been under siege for quite some time. And I know that one of the biggest priorities for Joe Biden is obviously gun control, ultimately leading up to gun confiscations, because they want to implement this registry with this new bill that they have.
Right.
My understanding is it's not being supported, so it's a good possibility it won't make it anywhere. So maybe it's DOA, but I think we definitely have to be very vigilant. And the only way I think that they'll really be able to implement the Great Reset here in the United States is to get rid of the Second Amendment at that point.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm afraid that what Biden might do on the executive order front with reference to this, banning certain types of rifles, and therefore that's a rationale for confiscation, banning sales, making it interminable wait time to get a weapon, making the not only that, but incredibly restrictive rules and processes. For example, they could be asking your ex-wife whether you should have a gun.
Yeah. That's insane. The other thing too, I know that they're trying to roll back is the lawsuit protections that the gun industry has, and that's an easy way of collapsing the industry itself is by getting rid of that.
They're trying to starve that industry out of existence. This is being done again through the ESG scoring system. They're trying to starve them out by cutting off their funding, cutting off their revenue, their ability to raise capital, either from banks or through investors. So that's definitely already underway. They're trying to starve these gun makers out of existence.
Yeah, and I think if we're not careful, that's very much going to happen. Because you don't necessarily have to roll back the Second Amendment if there's no guns or ammo available for you to purchase.
That's right. They've tried different prongs here. They've got a multi-prong approach to erasing our rights. And that's definitely one of them, is to destroy gun manufacturing itself so that getting a gun will become impossible, or getting ammo could be, even if you have guns, getting ammo will be impossible. So this basically renders your equipment utterly useless if you have no ammo to supply the weapon with. What good is it? It's just a trophy. So these are the kinds of this is a multi-pronged approach to abrogating the Second Amendment. Absolutely.
So Joe Biden, I know that John Kerry said that he's the Great Reset candidate. What is Joe Biden going to do to try and help usher in the Great Reset?
Well, he's already done some things, right? He canceled the Keystone Pipeline. He's also instituting the social justice elements of the Great Reset, which is this strange woke implementation of executive orders and laws to try to basically, it's an attack on the majority, in effect, by virtue of constantly giving money or giving a special treatment to minorities, to immigrants, illegal immigrants, and so on and so forth, and to allow unfettered immigration and without COVID checks and all that. Effectively, they're attacking the middle of the country, and I don't mean just the middle states, but the middle class. Basically, anybody who is so-called privileged, and which gets us into the function of wokeness. What's it about? I think wokeness is about it's about destroying the so-called privileged of whites and other dominant quote-unquote people, and effectively to reduce the population to a certain level, everyone down to a certain level. There's a leveling down going on, and this is being approached through all kinds of means. As I said, dribbling out money to, for example, farmers based on race or minority status, some sort of historical persecution or whatever. Generally, the idea here is to just level the population in some way. They don't want any possibility for, a kind of middle class that's based on merit. And they're saying it's not based on merit. Everything you have is a function of privilege.
Yeah, which is ridiculous.
You've done nothing for it, so you don't really deserve it. Therefore, you should abdicate it, in effect. Similarly, rights, you don't deserve them. They're actually privileges. This is the tricky thing about using this word privilege. Privileges can be eradicated.
Rights they have a hard time with, yeah.
Right. Rights are supposedly intrinsic to the person. So if you call something a privilege, and then you can wipe it out with justification. So I think this is the mode of operation that's underway. I think wokeness is not just some blue-haired, many years ago, and it's not that many actually, when 2016, when I came out against social justice in the university and all that, people are like, oh, this is just a few blue-haired kids on campus here completely exaggerating what the prevalence of this social justice and its meaning and all that. I said, wait, you'll see that this whole society is going to succumb to this social justice malarkey. And in fact, it's happened.
It is. We saw it last year. And because it's only a matter of time before those people with that ideology make it into the workplace.
They're in the workplace, they're in the state, they're in corporations, they're in major institutions, and they're running everything. And I don't think that the corporations are caving to it, as some people say. They're actually embracing it because it functions to their benefit. As I said, it helps to create this kind of de facto monopoly situation in which they're controlling all production and everyone else is reduced to universal basic income.
Yeah. Which is funny because I know that you mentioned this, and this is something I kind of noticed over the years. Back in 2000, it was around Thanksgiving, and I was in Plano, Texas. And if you've ever been there, I was there with a friend, and we're like, holy crap, this is like corporate feudalism. You have like the large corporate headquarters, and around that headquarters was a bunch of, basically, you had your medieval village. There's these subdivisions that were very cookie cutter. I mean, they were nice houses, nice big houses, but they all looked alike. There was no personality to them.
Right.
And it felt like, this weird kind of corporate feudalism. And I know that you mentioned it with neo-feudalism, but that's something that I mentioned and I kind of observed and forgotten about it, but you bring it back up again. And I definitely think this is happening.
Yes. And you saw this recently in Colorado, where the governor there is he wants to allow big tech corporations to establish independent states within.
Are you serious?
The state of Colorado. Yes.
Wow.
So you'd have your Apple and you'd have your Google Village, and these would have their own rules and so forth. They would be autonomous states within Colorado.
That is insane. And I remember South Park kind of making fun of this last season with the whole thing with Jeff Bezos and the worker consumer. The whole idea that we all work for Amazon at this point, and we buy their products.
Yeah, effectively we do. I just had a reader chide me because my books are for sale on Amazon, and I said, listen, I can't control where the publisher wants to sell the books, but I sell them independently as well. So if you want to go around to Amazon, you can come directly to my website and buy them there. But I'm not plugging my books so much as saying that I've tried to evade this hegemony, this Amazon hegemony, this incredible Amazonization of everything, and it's possible, but it's difficult.
Yeah, I know. I'm making a very concerted effort to purchase a lot less from Amazon. Obviously, it's super convenient, and it seems like either you have several options when it comes to big box stores. But when it comes to mom and pop, it's a little bit more difficult. I have since found other places I can buy certain things that I'm looking for.
Yeah.
Specifically when it comes to prepping and whatnot.
Right.
That way I'm not relying on Amazon. And quite frankly, I don't want to rely on Amazon. I don't want to give them any more money because of what is going on with the Great Reset and the things that they're pushing for. So ultimately, what this comes down to is how do we push back against this?
Yeah, I think I sort of alluded to this before, and that is to create these networks of marketing and commercial interaction between networks. There's a movement afoot. The name is escaping me. I've joined one of these cells, freedom cells. Yeah, freedom cells. There are these freedom cells that are forming. That's the kind of movement for libertarians and others, but mostly libertarians, to band together in these cells for exchange and support. I think this is a short-term fix. The long term is that we're going to have to Well, I mean, we're just going to have to assert our individual autonomy more. And for the individual, I think, and I don't speak in mass terms because that's leftism, and I don't like mass movements even. I would say the individual needs to find a way to become independent as you possibly can, economically speaking, because without economic rights, you don't have any rights.
Yeah, it sure seems that way, and that's something I know I'm working towards because since I talk out, about the stuff, and I push back against wokeness on my channel, and I do these videos for Unsafe Space. I know at some point in time I'm going to be target, and I'm probably going to lose my job as a result. So I'm trying to become, financially independent and not have to rely on a day job. It's just more there for convenience and having more money.
Yeah.
But at this point, I also see if we get what they want for 2030, where they have, you own nothing, you have no privacy, and you've never been happier. I also see the more kind of liberty-minded people and independent thinking people fleeing probably to the more rural areas and establishing their own communities.
Yes, definitely. There's going to have to be, I think, secessionism, or decentralization of communities is definitely one definite viable option, and a kind of, decentralizing and getting seceding in effect somehow. But you can't do it alone. You have to have a network at least. So networks of deviation, if you will, as I put it. Yeah. I don't have all the answers, I'm afraid, Ian. I can't.
Yeah.
I'm not. If I did, I'd be, I'd be Jeff Bezos. No, I
well,
wouldn't.
That's the thing I think we're all trying to figure out, and that's the main thing I've been telling my audience is we need to become activists for our rights. We need to get involved with local government and to push back against these policies. That seems like the only way to me.
Yeah, and fighting back and becoming independent at the same time, because in the meanwhile, we're all canceled. I think I'm basically uncancelable at this point, but I'm sure they could target me in ways that I haven't thought of yet. Banking. If the cell phone companies become woke, they could ban you from access to their network. It's possible. So not only, platforms like Parler getting thrown off by Amazon and Apple and Google Play, it could be individuals getting thrown out of their banks. And this has happened.
Yeah, we've seen it already, yeah.
Yeah. Being deplatformed from basically all the infrastructure that you rely on to survive. This is possible. So I think also I would suggest the cryptocurrency movement is important, although I'm not as invested in it as I'd like to be. I wish I had been. But cryptocurrency is definitely, it seems to me to be somewhat of a viable form of resistance.
Yeah, I think so. That's one thing I've been telling my audience too is look into crypto. Again, I'm not a financial advisor, but also gold and silver I think is also a good place to put your money as well.
Yeah, it's not performing as well lately, but it's better than, it's not a currency, but it is value.
Yeah.
You can't really trade it for goods and services in an easy way. But if digital currency comes in, a universal centralized digital currency comes into play, that means they'll have knowledge of every transaction, and also there are certain producers, certain vendors will not be allowed to receive cryptocurrency. Receive digital currency. If you're not an approved vendor, you could be shut out from the digital currency, and this could be very devastating. So we need to have infrastructure in place in advance of that.
Yeah, the idea. Yeah, this is something I've been looking into recently too, with the digital dollar. I know that's something they're pushing for. They're trying to get rid of Bitcoin, and it's the idea that they're able to basically raid your bank account. Oh, you owe this much in taxes, or we're going to fine you. And they did this to Count Dankula. He got fined, and he said, no, I'm not going to pay it. And they took the money from his account.
Yeah, that's what they do. With digital currency, they could take it right out of your bank, and they could take it out of all your transactions otherwise. Plus, they'll know every transaction they make. Also, there's a possibility of negative interest rates, so that you'll be losing money. They'll be charging you to keep your money, and therefore this will stimulate immediate spending. So everybody will basically be on a shoestring budget, but also they'll have to spend at a higher rate so that their money isn't lost through negative interest rates. This is also a very strong possibility with digital currency.
How can they do that? I mean, how is that even legal?
Well, the banks can institute it. If you have a central bank, which we do, but if it's centralized even more, such that maybe becomes global, then in fact they can charge negative interest rates. It's possible.
Wow. Well, that's all the questions I have for you. Is there anything you'd like to add?
Well, help me help me by buying my books, and Thought Criminal, I think, is right in line with all this stuff. And it's a novel. It's a very fast read, and I think it's quite enjoyable. I think it's accessible. I've had some critiques of it. Everything you try to do is somebody's going to criticize it. But I think it's almost like a blueprint for resistance at this point. It's almost like fiction is life is imitating fiction at this point.
It really is.
So I wrote it just, last summer, and by the time I came out, everything I said in the book was already basically happening. So there's this idea of a virus. There's a virus, but it turns out the virus is actually nanobots that connect to the neurons of the neocortex, attach themselves to the neocortex, and then can conduct information flows between the subject and collective mind. And likewise, supplant your thinking with the correct thoughts. And likewise, utterly threaten and really erase your individual selfhood. So the idea is to stay disconnected, and that's what this band of thought deviationists is attempting to do.
It all sounds very Demolition Man to me.
What's that?
The movie Demolition Man. It seems like the future. That's what we're heading towards.
Yeah, see, I don't pay a lot of attention to popular culture, not because I'm a snob, but because I just don't have time. From what it was kind of like the things that I put on myself to do, writing constantly and reading. So, yeah, people reference different things, and I'm not sure. And I think that's kind of better, because I don't want to be replicating anything. I don't know what other people have said. I'm just showing what my vision is.
No, it's not because of your book. It's just the future that we're heading towards with like a social justice. And the movie came out back in the 90s and has Sylvester Stallone and Wesley Snipes in it. It's a great movie, but in a weird sort of way, it seems like it's the future we're heading towards.
Yeah. I mean, I think The Matrix was one of the greatest movies and actually pieces of art in the last 30 years. And the only difference is that we're living in a physical matrix, and our bodies aren't batteries, but they're actually pieces of data on the internet. So, yeah, it's curious that way.
Yeah, it really is. Well, Dr. Rectenwald, I appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
My pleasure. It's great to talk to you.
Well, that concludes my interview with Dr. Rectenwald. If you'd like to learn more about him, you can head to his website, michaelrectenwald.com, or you can go and check out his book, Thought Criminal, which you can go and purchase off of Amazon. Thank you very much. This is Ian, signing off.
Thanks for watching. If you're new to the channel, we have a deep content library that includes interviews with everyone from Mike Cernovich to Megan Murphy, so go check it out. If you'd like to see more, please consider supporting the show by visiting unsafespace.com/donate. You can find us on all the major social media platforms, at least for now, and you can find a community of like-minded individuals on our Unsafe Space chat on Telegram. See you there.
Warning. This is an unsafe space. Dangerous ideas have been detected. The content of this production has not been authorized by the Cathedral. Pay no attention to it. The following co-conspirators have confessed to crime. For your protection, contact with these individuals is strictly prohibited. Did you know that liberty is just a dog whistle for insert evil ideology? If you think about it, no one should be allowed to express opinions. But don't. Think about it, I mean. That's not your job. Thinking has been scientifically proven to be less efficient than compliance. Oh no, please do not protest against racism. Anything but that. I beg you. Computer voice courtesy. Never mind, that last line is fake news. Please disregard it and return to your safe space immediately. There will be cake.